بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Tonight, inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala, we're going to have a special discussion with our brother from the South in Atlanta, Nadim Shaykh Al-Harari. And we're going to have an interesting discussion tonight about Ahle Sunnah wal Jama'ah in East Africa, Ethiopia, Somalia, these countries where our people had received Islam from the time of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that many of us may not be familiar with that history and the generational transfer of knowledge through that route. And as we always talk about all the time on this platform, that Ahle Sunnati wal Jama'ah is just that. Ahle Sunnah, the people of the prophetic way. And they are al-Jama'ah, meaning Jamhur al-Ummah. They are the majority of this nation. So that would mean both globally, all around the world, and historically, throughout the generations, we should be able to find that cohesive message, foundational belief and practice and spirituality represented anywhere in the world at any time. And it should be continuous with unbroken channels of transmission in each area, because al-isnadu min ad-din, that this chain of narration is a part of the religion. So it is our honor to sit with our brother Nadim and have this discussion and let him educate us on his experience with Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, family and connections, and how Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, even though sometimes in our respective areas we may seem like a small minority, but in reality we are a majority. Our teachers used to say to us, never feel alone. You are supported by mountains when you know the tradition of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. You are supported by mountains. So it's nice to know those mountains, right? Like it's nice to say it, but much, much more comfortable to know it, right? So inshallah ta'ala, we're going to welcome our brother Nadim, and he'll have his opening thoughts and words, and we'll get right to our conversation, inshallah. Barakallahu bikum, Sayyidi. Tafaddal.
Amin wa fikum, Sayyidi. First, I want to start off, Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa sallu ala nabi, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Like you always say, we want to expound upon what do certain terms mean, because people hear terms being regurgitated and they think they might be, cliques or name calling, etc. Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, as you said, fall in the Sunnah and the Jama'ah, overwhelming majority. In short form is Ahl Sunnah. In a shorter form or more common form is Sunni, follower of the Sunnah. So Ahl Sunnah, mashallah, has been in Habasha since the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Many people don't know we have about a dozen companions actually buried throughout Habasha. So that tradition has been there. But where the turn of Harar, where I'm from, makes a big turn is when Awa Badr came. So not to give you guys a long history session, but he was Umar al-Rida, from the Hijaz, and he descends from Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu. So there was a lot of warring amongst the tribes in Ethiopia. As you see with different communities now, we may not be warring physically, but there's clashes. And so some of the awliya, specifically our leader, Amir Haboba, he said, why don't we send some delegates to the Hijaz and define someone of honorable lineage, of honorable scholarship and righteousness, so that he can bring Ahlul Bayt into Habasha. And we intermarry with them, so by the blessings of Ahlul Bayt, then Habasha will be restored to peace and knowledge, etc. So when they went to Al-Hijaz, they found Umar al-Rida. So they gave him the offer, and he decided to come. So he came with his tribesmen, his children, other sharifs, and awliya. And of course, when he tried to call people to unity under one banner of Ahle Sunnah, as you can imagine, there's going to be tribal wars and such. And just to show the rahmah of our awliya, he didn't used to fight with a sword. He used to fight with a club, to show that, like a bat, to show that he's not here to spill blood. And so what he would do is he would encourage the different tribes, those who would finally agree, to intermarry. So now that ethnocentrism is no longer there, right? If everyone's bleeding in together genealogically, then that racism or tribalism disappears, mashallah. So he was famously known as Awa Badr, because he was told, if you get a power, if I give you this seat of power to rule Harar, you have to change your name to a Harari name. So Awa Badr, or Shaykh Badr was his name. He had to learn the Harari language, and he had to marry a Harari woman. And so from there, he actually brought the Shafi'i school to Habasha, which, as you guys know, is one of the 4 schools of jurisprudence. Before, Hararis were Hanafi. And a lot of people don't know this, but if you actually look at the manuscripts or the benedictions of Salawat of Awa Badr, it's a lot of explicit Ash'ari creed. And so when people say, why can't we just follow Islam, Quran and Sunnah? Well, this honorable creed, this fiqh that he brought, is derived, its basis is from Ahle Sunnah. And that tradition is so woven into our culture. Even if you're ignorant of the culture, you may not realize you memorize these texts. Common example, if I may, the starting text in Aqidah would be Aqidatul Awam, right? If you ask, for example, my father's generation, those in their 50s to 70s, they'll say they don't know anything about Aqidah. They don't even know what Aqidatul Awam is, but if you say, Abda'u Bismillahi wa Rahmani, they start reciting the whole thing from top to bottom. MashaAllah. But unfortunately, because of the war that broke out in Ethiopia, my father's generation, they fled to Europe, Australia, America, before they can learn the sharh, the explanations of these beautiful texts. So they would take texts like Safinatul Najah, Aqidatul Awam, At-Tahawiyah, and maybe Aqidatul Nasafiyah, if that. So those texts started to permeate the curriculum of the community, so to speak. MashaAllah.
Now, when you go back talking about the first arrival of that, what century was that?
So he arrived in about 405 after Hijrah, so right after the Salafus Salihin. So it's been about 1,000 years or so.
And from that time, as we talked about Asanid in our beginning, when I said Al-Isnad min ad-Din, so that most of the chains of narration from the people of that land, do they extend back to him?
They extend to him and the awliya he cooperated with. So there was a wali. So whenever you hear Aw so-and-so, like Aw Abadr, Aw Barqadle, Aw so, usually these are referring to the awliya or the senior scholars, the elite scholars of our region. So he cooperated with Aw Sofi, who actually started the first Quran Gay or Islamic school of the city. And so he would teach Aqidah. He was very heavy in Aqidah. He was very heavy in fiqh. In fact, Awa Badr, he has his own tariqah, the Abadiriya tariqah. And the tartib, or the methodology of the tariqah, is to learn, to teach, and to engage in salawat. And you'll see this is permeated. Even those who may outwardly say, I'm not a practicing Muslim, but I identify as Muslim, salawat is just known. Knowing these mutun by memory is known, like I mentioned, aqidatul awam. And so the chain goes through him and other than him, because historically, as you will see with Hararis even today, we have a myriad of colors and shades. Right? We don't have a monolithic look, because we have people from Turkey marrying in over the centuries. We even had a consulate in Turkey up until the late 1800s, if I'm not familiar. We had people from Syria come in, from Hadramaut, from Somalia. And so there was so much intermixing. Those chains also intermixed. Because the chains are going back to the Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam, it doesn't matter if you're learning a tahawiyah from this route or this route, they're seeing it's the same thing, memorizing it. So this idea of Ahlul Dalala really did not exist in Harar specifically. As you guys know, Harar is a gated city, so very exclusive. Non-Muslims were not allowed to come in like Al-Haramain was in the past. And that's why the creedal education stopped at Aqidatul Awam, Al-Tahawiyah, and maybe Nasafiyah, because there was not people of misguidance to refute. Their focus mainly was on fiqh, hadith, or the recitation of Al-Quran, depending on what their specialty was.
So when you're talking about mutun or text in Aqidah, so you mentioned that Aqidatul Awam, and you mentioned Al-Tahawiyah. So An-Nasafiyah, normally known as a Maturidi text. How did that get in the curriculum of the people of that land?
So even learning An-Nasafiyah, this was not very common. If someone wanted to go above and beyond in Aqidah, just so they can know what their brothers and sisters of Ahle Sunnah on the other side, i.e. Al-Maturidiyah, believe, they would take those texts. They might even take texts of their schools of fiqh, so they can know the valid differences. Because again, we're dealing with tradesmen who are intermarrying and interacting and doing business with people of different lands. And I'm sure, as you know, there are people in our masajid, in our communities, they see something they're not familiar with, they automatically want to strike it as bid'ah or haram or sinful. Right. But because these scholars were aware of the differences, specifically amongst the Malikiyah and the Ahnaf, likewise, they did the same when it came to the creed. So you might see some remnants of the Maturidi creed also as well within our history.
Now, in your lands, how did they define in terms of methodology Ahle Sunnah wal Jama'ah? So Ahle Sunnah wal Jama'ah, Sunni Muslims. When they wanted to explain men hum Ahle Sunnah wal Jama'ah, how was traditionally from that time up to today, how was that defined?
So for the Awam, it was usually defined as Ash'ari in creed, Shafi'i in fiqh, and Qadiri in tariqah. But as far as the more learned or academics, when they were defining it in a formal way, just like we're hearing today, the four schools of jurisprudence, Shafi'iyah, Ahnaf, Malikiyah, and the Hanabila, two schools of creed, Ash'ira and Maturidiyah, and then any of the consistent tariqas. And of course, we had the famous ones like the Qadiri tariqah, the Rifa'iyah, and then we had the less famous ones, less famous today, like I mentioned, the Abadiriya tariqah. And they have different jama'as as well, where they still maintain that methodology. So you might have Awabadir Jama'ah back home, or Al Hashim, named after the Wali Al Hashim, about a quarter century, about 250 years ago. Al Barkhadle. So we have those tariqas. So when they spoke of Ahl Sunnah, they understood what I just mentioned, following the tariqah. It's not a matter of is it optional or not. It's just known. Let me put it in this way. How do you live in Harar and not engage in salawat? When you have your nikah, you're hosting a mawlid. When you have a baby, you're hosting a mawlid. When you buy a house, you're hosting a mawlid. When you have a need, you're hosting a mawlid. And what do our mawlids consist of? Reciting Yasin, Tabarak, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim, mentioning his praiseworthy attributes, reading his seerah in a rhyming scheme, famously Al-Burda Qasida. So tasawwuf is not a mere practice of reciting the same wird every day. It's the implementation of your life. And so Riyadh al-Salihin, I'm sorry, not Riyadh al-Salihin. Yes, Riyadh al-Salihin. This text was also a big part of tasawwuf. Yani, it's trying to see, is my way of eating in line with the Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam? Is my way of dressing? Is my mannerisms towards my fellow Muslim and neighbor, even if he's not from my tribe, is this something the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam would accept? This is what tasawwuf is: breaking your sins down, being accountable for your sins, and you have to weigh it against a litmus test. You have to have something to weigh it against. And Riyadh al-Salihin was that. That was like the staple hadith book in Hadr.
And here's a funny thing to show you, and that's why these conversations are kind of important. So we're talking about in Africa, in East Africa, Northeast, all this area, you have this methodology. In Sham, with our teachers, when we were being taught Riyadh al-Salihin, our Shaykh explained it like this. He said the Riyadh al-Salihin, which is the book of technically hadith of Imam An-Nawawi, rahimahullah, he said it is a book of tasawwuf in the garment of hadith.
MashaAllah.
Right? He said Riyadh al-Salihin kitabun fit tasawwuf fi thawb al-hadith. Subhanallah, so beautiful. And here you're saying the same thing, and there is no physical connection between way over there and there, but the same concept.
Right.
Right. Like as we're learning that as a hadith book, but it's a living, amali tasawwuf, practical tasawwuf. And that's interesting. And one of the things we always talk about here is this global and historic outlook. And you can only see this when you talk from people who learned Ahle Sunnah from different places, and you'll see this connection.
Right.
Right. The question that I would like to follow that with is so that was in Aqidah. What is the common curriculum in Al-Fiqh? Because you said most of the people are Shafi'i there, right? So what is the curriculum from a beginner level to an intermediate level up to an advanced level? What is the standard, most familiar methodology that they use in Al-Fiqh there?
Right. So, of course, we follow the methodology of Ibn al-Jawzi, not to be mixed up with Jawziyah. So he said, first you teach your kid a matan of creed, which I mentioned a few, to memorize. Then you have him memorize a matan of tahara and babu salah. Then you have him memorize some short surahs for Quran. So we spoke about the creed. So in regards to fiqh, Safinatul Najat, this is what everyone started with at age 5 or age 6. There's a little bit of creed in the beginning, but primarily it's a fiqh book. And then after that, we had Al-Muqaddimatul Hadramiyya. So back home, they call it Bafadl. That's what it's known as. We like to have our own names in Ethiopia. Like if you ask someone what Suratul Ikhlas, they don't know. But if you say Suratul Qul Huwallahu Ahad, all of a sudden they know it as true.
So let me ask you, Bal-Fadl is the author of Al-Muqaddimatul Hadramiyya,
yes.
Right? Before that, do y'all have Al-Muqtasar As-Sagir? Which is written by him too. It's a summary of Al-Muqaddimatul Muhadramiyya. So that would be called Al-Muqtasar Al-Kabir. Then there's a small one. In Hadramaut, they call it Al-Muqtasar Al-Latif.
Right.
Was that prevalent there as well, or just Muqaddimatul Hadramiyya?
So just for the awam, for the lay person to get his basic Islamic curriculum, they would go from Safinatul Najat, and from what I learned, straight to Bafadl's book. Even then, sometimes they would take a sharh, and of course within the sharh is like, for example, the matan bolded. And so
Right.
your homework may be to memorize the mutun. So
Right.
the kids or the children, I don't like to use the term kids, the children primarily would memorize the mutun, and they would hear the explanation as they went along. The other matan that they primarily focused on was the matan of Abu Shuja. Rarely would they get its explanation, like Fathul Qarib, for example. Sometimes they would, but again, this is just for the awam.
Right.
And then if they're on the path to be talib al-ilm, potentially to be a scholar, then they would start getting to Umdat al-Salik, Minhaj al-Talibin, and of course their explanations. Rarely, but it was prevalent, not prevalent, but it was there, Minhaj al-Tullab and Fathul Wahhab, because we did have some mujtahids throughout the history of Ethiopia, some of which I don't recall their name right now, but we had many huffaz and muhaddithin, and so these books were well known amongst them. We had the different levels of scholarship. So even our lay people, they would have for fiqh Safinat al-Najat, Bafadl, and Matan Abi Shija under their belt. MashaAllah.
And here's the so that tartib, that sequence of learning books is commonly understood among even if they might not know it in a formal way, it's like a known system of learning.
Was a known system because we had a big war where the Christian ruler, pretty much, if you were Muslim, you identified as Muslim, you came from a family of you were slaughtered. So those who had wealthy family, they would send them off to school to Europe or to other regions, Saudi Arabia, Egypt. So that's how a lot of actually my dad's generation came to North America, to Canada and the US. So that chain was cut. And that's where our history kind of has a bump in the road, because they left as preteens or teenagers. So if you were to ask them, can you tell me the tartib? It's like asking you, what did you learn in elementary school? What were the textbooks you learned? And so then you have my generation trying to pick back up where our grandfathers left off, and where our fathers stopped midway.
So you find that there was, after all that, a serious break in the connection.
Exactly.
Is there a serious effort to revive that now?
There is, but I don't know how many Ethiopians you know, but our disposition, our nature is very soft, right? Many of us, we descend from Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu. So our disposition is soft. But when they have the knowledge, when they have a good team around them, they do work. But as you know, Ahlul Dalala works too. So maybe in the past 15 years, you've seen the doctrine of al-Wahhabiyya slowly seep into Ethiopia. Whereas in my grandfather's generation, you might have had 3 or 4 families identifying with that doctrine. They were socially outcasted. They weren't married into. So again, that's why Ahlul Dalala didn't grow. But because you have people of my generation, their elders, they didn't have that chain. They're trying to fill in the gaps of knowledge, the gaps of history, and also trying to make a change. But I mean, even the current Mufti of Ethiopia, Haji Umar, Mufti Haji Umar, like he does very good work, mashallah. Our Sheikh Samir al-Qadi, he's worked in his organization as well, the Ethiopian Islamic Affairs Supreme Council. So you'll see the Sheikh Samir al-Qadi will have like dawras there. So he'll work with Mufti Haji Umar Idris. But he's getting old, mashallah. And they've tried to bribe him, people of misguidance. They've tried to harm him in his majalis. But who knows what's to come in the next coming generation. But we have a lot of scholars of Ahle Sunnah putting in that work, and they have students graduating right behind them.
Among those scholars, because you're talking about now 1,000 years,
right,
from the previous generations, because here's one of the things that in our research that we try to keep, and our teachers pushed us to this, to maintain the Senate, not only in names, but in reality of people and texts and methodologies all the way back. right?
Okay.
So in every land, you have these traditional books, but you also have the ulama of that land who authored books.
Mm.
And their books are usually famous in their lands, and those books were conveyed from student to student to student. How has that process, if you know, existed, and what are some of those famous books in creed, in fiqh, in tasawwuf that have reached all today from
Mm.
your previous generational scholars? And let's say before the advent of Wahhabism, as you said, it came into the country. So
Mm.
before that, so prior to the 18th century, let's say, right? The beginning or the end of the 18th century. So prior to that, within that 400 years, I mean, that up to, excuse me, that 900 years or 800 years of scholarship, what has been left from the traditional works of the people of Ethiopia,
So
from
this is
their scholars?
this is the downside of an oral tradition, right? If one
Mhm.
link in the chain gets wiped out or significantly reduced, then that oral tradition of the mutun, whether it be texts of creed, fiqh, or salawat, they virtually disappear. So not only did the Christian emperor try to eradicate the people, his military would go and try to, seize the books and burn them. And so
Mhm.
you'll even if you go to Hadr today, if you ask to see some of their manuscripts, they have it locked away. You're lucky if they let you see it, let alone take a picture of it or touch it.
Mhm.
So, but we do have a museum at Hadr that preserves some of those textbooks of the Shafi'iyya, of the Asha'ira. One photocopy I have for you is called Kitab al-Fara'id. So it is by the Faqih Tayyib al-Wanagi al-Sadri. So
Mhm.
it's about a 500-year-old manuscript, and it's written in Harari, but with Arabic letters. So Harari is written in Arabic.
Mhm.
So you can call this the Fusha of the Harari language.
Mhm.
So if you read this, you would think you're reading At-Tahawiyya.
Mhm.
It's just explicit Ash'ari creed. Um, as for the fiqh, um, I don't know one that comes to mind off the top of my head, but what I can say is the texts that we are famous for, that even are in some of our households today, or many of our households, are the texts of salawat. So
Mhm.
what some of them would do is they would send our texts to Al-Azhar during this war,
Mhm.
serve it there. And when things cool down, then we know a place to go back to retrieve them.
Mhm.
So a famous text, which me amongst my Jama'ah, we recite, they've been reciting it every Thursday for 20 years, is a text of litanies known as Fathul Rahman,
Mhm.
openings of Ar-Rahman, yani the spiritual openings. Um, and so this text is it's such a staple text of Hadr, for example. When you get married, the groom receives from his now father-in-law a copy of the Quran and a copy of Fathul Rahman,
MashaAllah.
our methodology. And in fact, it was a methodology of Harari's. Once you reach your 20s, now when people reach in their 20s, they're thinking about finishing college and trying to get their life together. By then, they already own a shop, a wife, 4 kids. They're ready to go. But at this stage, one would write their own texts of salawat, their own collection of what they would recite on a daily, on a weekly basis during the annual Mawlid, etc. But Fathur Rahman, thanks to the efforts of this one organization, I think they're called Threads of Memory, they reprinted this and confirmed the manuscript by actually going to Hadr and talking with elders of this salawat text written by Al Hashim.
Mhm.
So we have a few texts like that, but Fathur Rahman would probably be the most famous one, as far even more than the creed books that we have authored.
And 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 so those, so that book that you mentioned, the manuscript there, is
Mhm.
that solely in Aqidah, or it is like a muqtasar of Aqidah, some fiqh, or just Aqidah only?
From what I was told, this is exclusively Aqidah. So I just have a few of the photocopies here. And it's just breaking it down. And if you actually hold it side by side to like the sayings of Imam Abu Hanifa in a Fiqh al-Akbar, or Imam Ahmad in Hanbal, etc.,
Mm.
you would think it's just being copy and pasted.
And, here's one of the things because I had this same thing. Like in Hadramaut, they have the same issue of many of the works, those popular books like Safina to Najah, Al-Muqaddimat al-Hadramiyya, and many of those they were so well known that they spread around the world. But I'm talking about the actual Hadrami books that weren't widespread. A lot of them are in manuscript, right? But because it is kept within a family, Asada al-Ba'alawi, it is still preserved in families.
Exactly.
Right? So like those manuscripts actually exist. And like a fact, I have most of my books from Hadramaut are manuscripts.
MashaAllah.
Right? Because that's how they were not printed. Now, some of the brothers and the editors, they are slowly bringing out this one, but most of it, like at every generation, a rich legacy of works. And one of the things that we talk about all the time here is we should learn from history. As you're telling us in history, a whole tradition can be lost if it's not preserved.
Exactly.
Right? And when that tradition is lost, let me follow that with another question. What was the impact, or is the impact now of that Wahhabi implementation of their doctrine in Ethiopia, as opposed to what you described up to their coming? What has been the impact based on that?
You know what the impact is?
Tough questions, but
Yeah, my heart is beating right now, subhanAllah, because I know some of these people very well. Their grandfathers are confirmed awliya of Harar, Somalia, throughout Habasha. And the verbiage being said nowadays, let me rewind a little bit. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, every nation has its test, and the test of this nation is wealth. And that is what, aside from the war, has destroyed our transmission, or our chain of transmission. Because the first step, the Hararis would move to Addis, which is a primarily Christian-run capital in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. And so they start interacting with non-Muslims, so there was a slight dilution there of that strong Islamic pride. Then they sent their children to the Western countries for a stable life after the war. Even if when the war ended, they would do that. Then they're in a place like America, where it's a big fruit salad of different ideologies. And so the verbiage nowadays is, I don't want to hear about Wahhabi. I don't want to hear about this association or that organization, or Ahle Sunnah or Shafi'i. They think, some people actually think Shafi'i is a sect, or Hanafi is a sect. They say, I'm just Muslim. And these people, some of their parents or grandparents were awliya. So that question, it hurts, because we should not speak about the religion if we don't know. You are safe when you say, I don't know. But because of their doom scrolling on social media and reading the news and talking to naysayers, they actually have no idea that if they just go back home, not for a tournament, not for a cultural festivity, just try to go to those families that have those manuscripts, you will see that Ahle Sunnah is not a new term. You will see Shafi'iyya is not a new group or codification. But it's virtually dead, to the extent where if you ask, your average Muslim from Ethiopia in the West, can you list me the 4 madhabs? Can you name me the 2 schools of creed? They wouldn't know the answer. So that's where we went within a generation or a generation and a half. And those manuscripts still exist. But the obsession of wealth, we're not refugees. We're not 1 paycheck away, or from being homeless. They become so entrenched in wealth, and it's good to have a good education, to have a good honorable career. But to the extent where you forget the chain of transmission of knowledge that people literally had shed their blood for, that's what we're facing nowadays. And you see those trying to revive it. But we have to get over the tribalism or the colorism or whatever isms that they want to bring about, and this obsession of wealth. And inshallah, we can bring it back.
So let me ask you a question, inshallah. May Allah give all of the people of Habasha tawfiq to do it, inshallah. But you know, that's going to be a lot of the job of the youth.
Yeah.
No, that's the work.
Right.
And I remember talking to one of my teachers about this. He said to me, at one time I was really going through it. Just that was taxing, it's extremely taxing, especially all of what you said. Knowing what you know and seeing what you see is very taxing, right? Like, a reality. This ain't some new stuff. This ain't a new matter. This is well known, but it's not well known after all the plots and conspiracies and things that happen to destroy knowledge.
Right.
So I was talking to my teacher one time and I said, I just want to go be with you. I was like stressed. I said, I just want to go be with you and call it, let somebody else do that. And he said something to me, and I was younger then, he said, I never forget this. Every time I get tired, these words ring in my mind. He said, stop complaining. You don't know who you are. Get to work. That, just like that.
Allah.
Stop complaining. You don't know who you are, and get to work. And that sound like just goes. And what I understood from that is, y'all young, do the job. The result will come from Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. But the work is your job. Our great Imam Al-Haddad, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, described that in his diwan in 2 words. Jahid to shahid. Struggle and you will witness. 2 words, that's it. So we share, as you're talking, as African Americans, we share that same loss, right? And it's important that we connect the missing links and cooperate with one another to revive, so we can say, if the world lasts that long, that generations 500 years later will say, our grandfathers preserved this deen for us. Our asanid are intact. Our curriculum is intact. The Islamic sciences are intact, right? Like, that's a job that we have to do. What are your thoughts in that?
If any Hararis are watching, they're not going to like that I'm saying this, but we speak the truth whether people like it or not, with the best manners we can. I don't know if you know this, but do you know what it took to be a Harari before? Like, what deems someone Harari?
No.
So just like Abu Badr, he comes from the Hijaz. He has no African blood whatsoever. So to be Harari, if you came from a different tribe or even a different country, if you were elite in business, in worldly academia or religious academia, then you were considered Harari. Another synonym for Harari would be Gay Usu, which means people of the city. Gay means city, Usu means people. So this is actually where the term Gay Usu derives from. Because when we have people who are ethnically not Harari, they are accepted into the fold because they have a high status to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for their knowledge or their piety. Or, for example, they can help fulfill the fard al-kifayas of the communities, not just about fard al-ain, by being a doctor, being an accountant, being an entrepreneur in X, Y, or Z, then they became integrated into our community. There was no hierarchy or classes based on ethnic groups. The downfall of the Hararis is when they start discriminating and thinking they're so great. Just to give you an example, the Amharas, which is like the majority tribe of Ethiopia, tens of millions of them. Back in the day, if they had a Harari friend or a colleague they had a good rapport with, it would be like, wow, you're friends with a Harari? MashaAllah. You're like a socialite. Like you're able to break into the Harari group. This got to the heads of the generations, just like when you see billionaires. They work hard. Most billionaires and multimillionaires are self-made. But you see the crumbling of that work ethic with the next generation because they're riding on the coattails of their fathers. So what happened with the Harari people, unfortunately, and Allah is the one who can change our scenarios, they started to think highly of themselves. And the way to wilaya, or at least if you're not amongst the awliya, to be amongst the salihin, is to think low of yourself and to see yourself as falling short, not in a self-deprecating way. And when you see your fellow Muslim, perhaps he has better attributes than me that I can benefit from. You don't let tribalism or any isms get in the way. So fast forward to now, if you want to be free from what destroyed many African tribes, not just Hatters, not just Ethiopia, it's all throughout Africa. If you are from this country, this ethnic group, and someone who is African-American is able to cooperate with you, or someone who is Arab, or someone who is of a completely different ethnic group or backing that you're not familiar with, they have the right creed, they legitimate the madahib, they do not call you a kafir or anything for following tariqah, they don't call you grave watchers, you work with them. This is the work of Ahle Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, they gave us permission, and it's our obligation by living in a non-Muslim country to serve a da'wah, because Ahle Sunnah is like an orphan. So if you do that, you may not see the fruits today. Just like, as you know, many of our scholars, they didn't become famous till after they died. Perhaps your grandchildren will say, because of the work that Baba did or my grandmother did, etc., I can proudly say I'm a Muslim and I know my not just genealogical roots, but my chains of transmission, my roots to the Prophet ﷺ. So that's what we have to do. Get your money, get your bread, but don't let it be like this hustle culture that these youngsters like. I'm a youngster too, but it's as if like you've never seen a dollar. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Get your halal money and work. You don't have an option. Subhanallah. Like by virtue of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala giving you an aql and giving you two legs where you can move around and you have $1,000 cell phone and you can communicate, you have to do da'wah. It's not an option. If you don't want to teach, marhaba. You set up the tables for the daughtas. Work on the flyers. Do accounting. The Prophet ﷺ said, save yourselves from hellfire, even if it's a date fruit. Even if it's gifting a date fruit. How about supporting Ahle Sunnah wal Jama'ah? Subhanallah.
Here, I want to ask you something. Now I'm going to move a little bit over close
Sure.
Ethiopia to Somalia, because we have a lot of, in this country, Somali communities.
A lot, yeah.
And I travel to some of them often. And one of the biggest concerns of them, and I'm talking about the elders, which they bring us for, help us get our youth. We're losing our youth. And when we go visit them, the same description you gave of the knowledge, that's what those youth, they don't know the details of it, but it's a part of them. What was the connection between Ethiopia and Somalia in this regard?
I mean, the Europeans are always redrawing the lines of where this place and that place is. Harar is actually used to be a part of Somalia until the 1880s, if I'm not mistaken. So this is why even Shaykh Abdullah al-Hawri, rahmatullah alayh, he had a Somali passport. If you look at his intro and a lot of his texts, you'll say Shaykh Abdullah al-Harari al-Shaybi as-Sumal. And likewise, me and many Hararis, we have that connection. And so Awa Badir, the wali I spoke about who came from Al-Hijaz, he came with his 10 sons. So he would send them and other awliya and fuqaha to throughout the Horn of Africa, and Somalia was no different. And so because he encouraged that intermarrying, because if you're half Somali, half Harari, how are you going to be, pro-Harari and anti-Somali, for example? Or if you're half African American and half, Oromo, you're going to be more sympathetic to the struggles of the African Americans and the Oromos. You won't be tribalistic. And so when he intermarried, and they intermarried over the generations, they came about a tribe known as the Shaykhal clan, or the Shaykhal tribe. Hence why my name Nadim Shaykh is from that Shaykhal tribe of Somalia. So that history was there. They were historically Qadiri, Asha'ira, Shafi'iyya, but they too suffered a war similar to Ethiopia. Differences from what I'm seeing, they haven't recovered economically and government-wise as well. And so a lot of them, they'll come here because they don't have an identity. They don't have that chain. They just identify with the rambunctiousness of whatever they may see in their high schools or their neighborhoods. And those are very easy people for Ahlul Dalala to sweep up. And so you'll see, like you said, here in Atlanta, we have one masjid, straight up Sufi. Qadiri, they host a Mawlid, very humble masjid. Then you have people on the other side, down the road, Ahlul Dalala. What I'm seeing is the elders.
These are Somalians, right? Somali community, right?
Somalis, yes.
Yes.
They are very high energy, very intellectual people, historically, mashallah, masters of Quran recitation. But as you know, there's always going to be generational clashes. The elders are trying to connect with these youngsters who they raised in America, but expect them to have Somali values or Ethiopian values, or if you're from Bilad Sham, back home values. And so just like the Ethiopians, there is also that clash in the Somali community. It just may seem more apparent because there's significantly more Somalis. I mean, they run Minnesota. They're all throughout Ohio and Atlanta and Seattle. And so Al-Wahhabiyya, they've also swooped them up. They swoop them up. They get these free scholarships to go to Medina University. They come back, they get these platforms, and they're having a field day, which, like you said, it's not optional. We have to do the work of a da'wah because a whole generation.
Do y'all dialogue within y'all communities with this spread of that doctrine? Because for all of y'all communities, the traditional, once you go beyond, and this is very important, and we mention this all the time, the da'wah of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab is no older than roughly 250 years, less than that, but right. Let's say roughly. He died in around 1206, something like that, right? Mm-hmm. So you're talking about 1445, 200 and something years, right?
Right.
In all of those lands, and that's why I said knowing our and preserving our asanid, our chains, our culture and practice is extremely important, because if you go back before that movement, generation to generation, you would know what your people were upon, what it looked like. And it won't be just vague. Like someone asked me, they said, what made you have such an attachment to the Ba'alawi way in Hadramaut? And I told them, it is one of the purest connections of, number one, the family of the Prophet ﷺ, that is preserved, that is well known on the face of the earth. And the tradition is a family. So its connection is well preserved at every level of the chain back to the Prophet ﷺ. Like that is something you won't find. It's not guesswork. right?
Right.
If we trace through the awliya of Asada al-Ba'alawi, from our generation, we could go multiple routes to the generation preceding them, the one preceding them, the one preceding them, right? Non-stop, with at every level, awliya, fuqaha, arifin, mutakallimun, lughawiyun, like on and at every single level.
Right.
Masters. Most of them, because of the tasawwuf, are not known. Right? Meaning they wasn't about all that stuff. They didn't care about the dunya.
Right, right.
So most of them, like giants, who were not known, but was putting in a lot of work. Right? I remember one of the teachers who we had the blessing to meet a few years before he died, right? He was the leading sheikh of Ribat Tarim, which is one of the oldest institutions in southern Hadramaut, in Tarim, Yemen. And meeting him was such a lifetime experience, to the point he had the title Sultan al-Ulama, like this Ibn Abdus Salam, right? But if you sat with him, you don't see none of that. Like, this is one of the foremost scholars in Hadramaut, training generations of scholars. And the generations before me were scholars who sacrificed in the time of communism and everything, right? But when you learn from their route, you like, everybody was like that. You know how you say like the Harari was soft people. Everybody like that. Not one, not two, not three, not four, not five, not six. At every level. The fact, all of the books you mentioned were from them. Like in Somalia, in Ethiopia, were from them. Like, that's preservation.
Right.
Right? From multiple routes. And I remember one of my teachers, a lot of them, because before the Wahhabi movement, they were the scholars of Hijaz. If you went to Hijaz prior to and even during the beginning of the Wahhabi expansion, the scholars of Hijaz were from Asada al-Ba'alawi. The imams, the teachers in the haram of Mecca and Medina were them, right? And one of them, he lived in Jeddah, and the family in Mecca. And I'm talking to one of them, and we were talking about the Wahhabiyya, because they live in Saudi Arabia. So he said, and I was explaining to him our situation in America. And he said, but guess what? We survive despite that, and we still spread. Despite being under such harsh regime, we spread and we survived, and we never lost our lineage.
MashaAllah.
For me, that's a model that we need to do. Right? For me, and they connected us with the way to do it. And they gave us 3 objectives to do that. They call it al-maqasid al-thalatha. 3 objectives: al-ilm, al-amal, and ad-da'wah. That's how we have to move. We have to learn al-ulum al-shar'iyya. We have to implement it. Because إنما العلم للعمل, knowledge is to practice. Being practiced is just kalam,
أيوة.
right?
صح.
And then we have to spread it and preserve it, right? And that methodology worked all around the Islamic world. And whenever we left it,
Crumb.
MashaAllah. So, what advice would you give us We're funny. I'm looking at the comments. Yeah, hilarious. Can I ask? I say this, and I'll just brief. If I have cancer, you want me to concentrate on my cut finger?
No.
All right. That's why when we talk about Wahhabiyya, because that's our cancer. The other stuff is like we can solve it with a Band-Aid. Cancer can't be solved with a Band-Aid. Right? And our teachers used to say it in another way. They said, if you had gangrene in your hand or in your foot, would any of you say, I have gangrene in my hand, it's my hand, I can't cut it off, or it's my foot, I can't cut it off? Would anyone act like that? Because they know the nature of gangrene. If I don't cut my hand, it's going to spread through my body till I am destroyed. He said that al-Wahhabiyya, they are like gangrene fi jasad al-ummah, in the body of this nation. Either we cut it or we let it spread to what you just described happens, to what happened to our community happens and continues to happen for generation after generation. Somebody has to go work on this cancer.
Right.
Someone has to amputate to save the rest of the body. That is an analogy we were given why we have to deal with it.
And that's very similar to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where, you know, some people, they feel like, well, I don't have Wahhabis in my family. I don't have Mujassima or people in misguidance in my family. Can we talk about something else? Can we just all get along? And that's very selfish. And that shows that, again, they probably did not take Riyadh al-Salihin. Because the Prophet ﷺ, he said, the ummah is like one body. When one part is sick, the rest should be aching. And if you have a headache, do you say, well, my legs don't hurt, so let me go take a jog? It doesn't work like that.
And here's the other thing. And this is the sad thing. Those who have a problem with it, most likely, and we say most likely because we can't speak of every single individual. It's very important. So we're not going to be inclusive, but most people, either they were themselves, or let's give possibilities. They are Wahhabi by another name. So to hear the word, it's like, it's hitting me because that's me. You're talking about me. As I used to give Jumu'ah khutbah, and one of the elders, he died, rahimahullah, he used to say, everybody think the imam is stepping on their toes. He's not even talking about you. The problem is your feet is so big, and no matter where he walk, he gonna step on your toes. That's the old man's wisdom. He said, your feet is so big, no matter where he walks, he gonna step on your toes. But that's one possibility. The second, we have friends, family members that are still in that. And that's an emotional empathy that we keep going through. Right? And the other, which is probably the majority, have a default Wahhabi setting because no one spoke up. It's a default setting. when I embrace Islam and I want Islam, the thing that's in front of me in our environments is a Wahhabi doctrine. I have no other way out because of what you described in many lands where the Sunni tradition is not being preserved and maintained.
Well, you missed one as well.
What's the other one? These are the possibilities I had.
Popularity. Because the Wahhabis, they have changed their da'wah. As you know, in the 90s, early 2000s, very aggressive, straightforward, not a clean look. Their da'wah now is very PC liberal. So their da'wah, you may not even realize you're going to one of their centers, is to preach, get along with everybody. We accept everybody. Love, love, love. And you see this with a lot of the Islamic personalities because it puts the money in their pocket. As you know, they're called scholars for $1. So popularity, if you want to be popular in community, if you want to not be targeted or canceled, you have to be accepting and willing to tolerate all sorts of factions. And that's what I'm seeing permeate my generation. They may not even be to a Wahhabi center. They might go to a Sufi center. But they're saying, can we just focus on the love, the seerah? The seerah is going to be vanished if you don't preserve the knowledge. You're more concerned about appeasing everybody instead of doing what's right. SubhanAllah.
But here, this is the trick that's played on us.
Mm-hmm.
They were successful at cloak and dagger movement. You ever heard that before? Cloak and dagger?
Mm-hmm.
There's one thing happening, showing you, but something else is, I'm stabbing you. I get faking. Right?
Right.
Here, go to their teachers. Study the books. That's why I said we got to do research. Study the books of those, not the one that's in front of you. From where is he learning? Mm-hmm. What is in those books? And then you will see the talking we doing is light to what they're saying towards Ahle Sunnah wal Jama'ah.
So true, so true.
Yeah. Right? So if you read their books, and those who are learning, they're hearing that. They're hearing that. When they come back with that battery pack in their back. Mm. All of the Muslims are grave worshippers. They worship the saints. They're making shirk. They're calling on others than on Allah. That's the message. They are people of innovation. Mm-hmm. They are buried in shirk. And we have to bring them to pure Tawheed. As if for 1,200 years, globally and historically, Muslims didn't know Tawheed. I was watching a video the other day. It's so crazy, but our people don't know this stuff. Right. Somebody got to tell us. The title of the video, it was a Jumu'ah speech defending Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani and Imam al-Nawawi. May Allah be pleased with both of them. That's the title. As a Sunni, you're going to say, MashaAllah. Right?
Right.
So the speaker, he's giving the speech. Graduate of the University of Medina, African-American. He's giving a speech. He says, the two greatest books, most reliable, authentic books after Al-Quran are the Sahih of Al-Bukhari and the Sahih of Muslim. No doubt. Any scholar who's worth the salt would know this. That's true. No doubt. And two of the greatest scholars who explain those most authentic books are Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, which should have been a red flag. Sunnis don't talk with such disrespect. That's Al-Hafiz Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. He's not Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani.
Al-Hafiz.
And in fact, we don't need to say anything else. You don't even need to say his name. Just say Al-Hafiz, and it's already known who you're talking about. That's his rank. You don't have to say nothing else. Just say Al-Hafiz. That's it. Khalas. Rahimahullah. We don't need to talk about nothing else. We know who it is. Amirul Mu'mineen fil Hadith. As Sunnis, we know that. Don't have to say anything else. Right? In fact, in our books, that's all they say. Qal al-Hafiz. That's it. They don't have to say anything else. Right? But for them, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. Right? Disrespect. Right? While you're supposed to be defending them, you're disrespecting them. Right?
Right.
Then, and Nawawi. Who's Nawawi? Al-Hafiz al-Nawawi, Al-Imam, Al-Hafiz, Shaykh al-Islam, Muhyiddin, Abu Zakaria, Yahya ibn Sharaf al-Nawawi. That who you talking about? Al-Nawawi. But, I mean, you said they authored the most famous explanations on the most authentic books. In other words, to the point that you can't talk about hadith unless you talk about their books. That's the level. We agree. And he says, but they made mistakes in the attributes of Allah. Wait a minute. Pause. Hold the tape. You mean to tell me they're the most authoritative figures on the two most authentic books after the Quran, but they didn't know what to believe? Really? We mentioned the Hafiz here, and I hate to go on this, but this is what we're facing.
Right.
This is what is affecting our community. By the definition of the scholars of hadith, when they use numbers to describe a hafiz of hadith, that number is 100,000 hadith with the chains of narration. You memorize 100,000 hadith with the chain of narration, not from Al-Bukhari, from themselves. And Nawawi died 676 AH, 7th century. Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, Imam al-Nawawi, rahimahullah, died 676. He was a hafiz of hadith. So all of his asanid is from the 7th century back to the books of hadith, and from there back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, rahimahullah, died in the year 852, 9th century. From him all the way back, he memorized all that. All of them wrote in Rijal, the narrators. They wrote books and talking about all the narrators. So they didn't just know the narrator, a chain. They knew every single one of them and their story. And they wrote books about it. But they didn't know the first thing you're supposed to learn about Islam.
The ABCs of Islam.
Come. Stop here. I mean, just that doesn't make sense. They got all that right. But the first thing you're supposed to learn about Islam, they didn't understand. But here's what I'm saying that, right? Then, wait a minute, then went on the minbar. They were Ash'ariyah, which you mentioned and what I mentioned in all of these lands. They were Ash'aris. And the Ash'ari creed is whacked. Wow. That's not just an attack on those great imams. Everyone above them and everyone that came after them, who were like them in narrating. Every way the religion reached us was through men like them.
There you go.
And they all didn't understand. They were all wacko. Until a man came who didn't reach their level. And now we have pure Tawheed. That's what you're selling us? And we're supposed to buy that? I mean, let's deal with it. Like when we think about it, and we should just remain silent about that. When you just described the result of being silent about that, because you described it. You described it in your country and in Somalia, and we're supposed to just remain silent? Should we? And I'm not saying we should be harsh, but we at least can be honest, right?
Integrity is the first step, mashallah.
Right? I mean, and they tricked us to believing that all of our great scholars how we received the religion were all misguided deviants. That's a little bit too much. So really, are we really being harsh? Are we really speaking about it? I don't think we're speaking about it enough. If you really think of the result of remaining silent. So if we remain silent, we'll never have chains of narration because they're going to wipe them out.
Right.
You just described it. They're going to wipe it. It's gone. Right? And they're going to replace those great scholars with a whole new group of far less in knowledge, practice, spirituality, anything you name, and they're going to give us them as our role models. What are we looking at here for future generations if we let that happen? And no one can do that except us.
There you are.
That's our job. That is, for us, wajibul waqt. That's the obligation of the time. We don't have a choice, or we die. And I mean, literally, because if we fall into disbelief, we shot.
Back to the pagan era. Yeah.
So what's your thoughts about all that? I know I went long, but when I read the comments, sometimes we don't realize what we be saying.
First and foremost, you have to be humble. You have to be honest with yourself, almost take an audit of yourself. What did I formally learn? Not on the first 2 pages of Google, not from a Mufti Chat GPT. What did I formally take the time and effort to learn with a chain of transmission? And after that, you ask yourself, what I'm saying, is it in line with the methodology of not just the mashayikh of today, but again, Ahle Sunnah wal Jama'ah? We can't forget the rest of the Jama'ah here. Is what I'm saying in line with them? Because the companions, what did they learn for the first 13 years? Tawheed. Well, you just qul huwallahu ahad and that's it. They learned the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They were firm in it. And then over time, by the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the different laws of jurisprudence came about. But because their foundation, their belief in Allah was so firm, when they're told stop the alcohol, ala rasi. When they're told pray 5 times a day, they're praying. No eating for 12 hours a day, no drinking, no. Because their belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, i.e. who they're doing this for is firm. But when you believe in a creation, or you're not sure on who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, then in actuality, what are you parroting? When you say, let's follow the 5 pillars of Islam, what's the first pillar? La ilaha illallah. People jump that, they go straight to salah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if it wasn't for him, we would be in the darkness of idol worship. If it wasn't for him, we wouldn't know how to treat our spouses, our Muslim friends, our Muslim neighbors. The solution is just to be quiet and to be humble and learn and then speak based on the knowledge. If you didn't learn, you don't have a seat at the table. And if you learned, you have to speak Based on what? What you said. Because like one of our shuyukh said, he said, the word of the scholar is not taken merely because he's a scholar. Rather, the word of the scholar requires evidence. So just because you reach a certain maqam in the eyes of the people doesn't mean you can say whatever you like. For had this religion been by our opinion, we would be wiping the bottom of our khuf, because that's the side that gets dirty. So when Imam Ali, rahmatullah alayhi wa karamallahu wajha, he's telling us that, don't be opinionated. And you were raised in a country like America for 20, 30, 40 years, you're taught everyone's opinion matters. Speak your mind. Democracy. You can't act like it didn't affect you and didn't permeate into your Islamic practice. If we don't have this belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if we don't talk about Allah, that he does not resemble anything, he doesn't need anything, whatever you imagine in your mind, Allah is different from that, what do we talk about? If you don't want to know about Allah, then how can you say you love Allah? And if you love for your fellow believer goodness, how about if there's someone out there who thinks God dwells in the sky? Or someone who doubts, is Islam legitimate or not? Because we have a lot of people poking at us as Muslims. People cry about what's happening in Palestine. Learn your history. Where did that start? Who conveniently, when the Islamic caliphate of 1300 years, when it got dissolved, who conveniently came in as a family and took over and started destroying our nation? Allah. You have to have the adab to stay quiet. And if you see something strange from the people of knowledge, ask. Don't just run your mouth saying, why do we talk about aqidah? Can we talk about history? Can we talk about 1,001 ways to boost your iman? La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. All these are ploys to make money. They're fooling you. And I'm going to give you one example, Imam, if I may.
Go for it. The tough questions is coming. I'm letting you know. So I told you already they were going to come.
No, that's fine.
I'm going to put it in your lap and let you have it.
These Islamic speakers, the Islamiyun on YouTube, or who I call the scholars for $1. Don't they always talk about connecting with your salah? You know, connecting with your 5 daily prayers. Salah is so important. Yet how many of their institutes teach you the tartib of how to pray salah? Because the reality is when they don't teach it, or let me put it this way, if they try to teach you Babu Salah, they will have to answer to the reality that they are not teaching from the 4 schools of fiqh. And if they say, well, we follow the Salaful Salihin, which a lot of them say that's their verbiage, that's their banner. Well, people are going to start asking questions. Academia breeds intellects. The intellectuals have to come about. Well, who are the Salaf? I want to follow the Salaful Salihin. Who should I follow? They start saying Ibn Taymiyyah, Bin Baz, Uthaymeen, Albani, kaza wa kaza. It's like the same broken tape that's just repeating the same 6 names. These 6 figures saved the Muslim nation from shirk ala za'mihim. But no, Salaful Salihin, they're from the first 300 years. Ibn Taymiyyah was in the time of the Vikings. Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab was from the time of George Washington. Bin Baz and Uthaymeen, Albani were just the last few decades. Who are from the Salaful Salihin? I want to learn from them directly, not these people who may misunderstand or misinterpret. So when you look at the Salaful Salihin, who's from the Salaf, the first 300 years? You have Imam al-Ash'ari. Ooh, they don't realize that. Al-Maturidi himself, Imam al-Shafi'i himself, Al-Tahawi himself, Ahmed ibn Hanbal. And when you actually look at it, it becomes clear as day. The people who are preaching Tawheed, Tanzih, the fiqh of the 4 schools, Tasawwuf, they're actually citing people who are from the Salaful Salihin. It destroys the Wahhabi doctrine. But instead of opening that door, because when you're talking or going hand to hand academically with Ahle Sunnah, you're not going to beat the methodology of the Prophet ﷺ. So what do? They cover it. They talk about tafsir, which is an honorable science. They talk about history, which is great. They might host a myriad of sciences, and conveniently they leave out the fard al-ayn. Conveniently they leave out talab al-ilmi faridatun ala kulli Muslim. The obligatory knowledge. This is what saves a person. The seerah, the Quran recitation, and its different styles, these are all like icing on the cake. But who wants a plate full of icing with no cake? So we have to humble ourselves and refer to the people of knowledge as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructed us in Al-Quran. MashaAllah. That's the first step. If you're not willing to take that step, you don't get a seat at the table. It's that simple.
Get a seat at the table, huh? Let me. I want to. Are you ready? Because the difficult questions are coming, and on our platform, we don't. We have this rule
Mhm.
for us. If we don't know, we're not afraid to say we don't know. We don't know everything.
Of course. Of course.
We don't know everything, right? So when we don't know, we say we don't know. And what's easier for us, because we actually have teachers. So what we don't know, we will go search. It's not a big deal. We know we don't know because we have teachers and we sit around people who really know. So we know we don't know. It's not a difficult issue. Second thing, we live in a time where we can't afford to run from challenging issues. We have to address them, even if it may be a little painful, because what's at stake is greater than our pain. You know, what we if, by not dealing with it, we're going to have a bigger pain later. So let's deal with it, right? And I say that to preface because we're going to get some painful things coming, but I don't want never to say we ducked. We don't duck. We deal with it with manners, with behaviors, but if we don't have nothing to hide, right? And we can have real honest discussions. So I'm going to let the questions fly so we can take them, inshallah. So the first question, and they're in order as they came. I'll put them up. So our brother Murad Ali, he's talking about you.
Right.
He wanted to hear your views on Ahbash and Sheikh Abdullah al-Harari, rahimahullah, and how widespread they are. Right. And I'll let you take that. And that's a question to you.
From the
I have my own answers, but it's for you.
Okay.
So I'll let you go.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa sallu ala nabi, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. From what I know, Shaykh Abdullah al-Harari, rahmatullah alayhi, and his students and his organization, they are in about 70 some odd countries, in over 100 cities. When someone asks a question, what do you think about this Shaykh or that Shaykh? I always first like to see, if I'm talking face to face, is, well, what is your intention behind that question? Because usually people are either piggybacking off of hearsay or they are sincere. What I always say is Shaykh Abdullah al-Harari, his chain is no different from any of the different Islamic organizations of Habasha. And although I respect all the different cultures and ethnic backgrounds of our fellow Muslims, the reason why I'm very happy to be from Ethiopia is because when you see the texts of Shaykh Abdullah al-Harari, paired with the fact that we have the advent of the internet, so it's very confusing. You hear a lot of conflicting information, whether it's about him or other scholars of Ahle Sunnah or speakers of our communities. You may ask yourself and find yourself saying, how do I get to the truth? And so it goes back to the chain. So they're prevalent, mashallah, and they are people who defend the creed. I have benefited greatly from the Ahbash. And if someone says, well, can you refer me to an Ahle Sunnah group other than the Ahbash, whatever reason they may have? Again, if you go to those who have the same chain, you will find the doctrine is not different. Because as soon as the doctrine deviates from the chain, well, then we know not to take that information. And also, when there is a valid difference of opinion, which is very prominent in fiqh, but you're not going to get that in your mutun, you're going to get that in the medium to advanced books. When you hear something strange from the people of knowledge, you ask about it. You ask for the resources. And most importantly, you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide you to what is correct. So they are very strong in creed, alhamdulillah. They're very strong in Shafi'i fiqh. And when I interact with people of Ahle Sunnah from different countries, even in Ethiopia, I see the chains are very much similar. I can't even recall off the top of my head seeing any core doctrines being different, whether they're by ijma or whether they have a difference of opinion.
Next question. That's not a question. Why do they refer to us Ash'aris as Jahmiyyah? Ash'aris, as I see something on this. Oh, that's for me. I'll let you the guess, and if I need to chip in, I'll jump in. If you want to take it, and I'll come in with you, inshallah.
I've always been referred as a Jahmi by Al-Wahhabiyya or their colleagues. I don't know why. I don't know the answer to that. Okay. But if you know it,
all right, inshallah. The term Jahmi refers to a man who lived in the earlier days of the Islamic history. His name was Jahm ibn Safwan. And
right.
He and his followers were known to deny the attributes of Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala, his sifat. What the Wahhabiyya have done, and that's why we must mention them. Mm-hmm. They said that the Ash'aris, deny the attributes of Allah like the Jahmiyyah. Mm-hmm. So their predecessor in this issue was Ahmad ibn Taymiyyah, mm-hmm. who said that making a ta'wil, figurative interpretation, or a tafweed, leaving the meaning, the reality of those attributes and the knowledge of them to Allah, he called that a ta'til, negating Allah's attributes. Yeah. So those Wahhabis, they went further in that than he did, and they applied the term Jahmiyyah to the Ash'aris. Let me clarify that, as we are Ash'ari. The Ash'aris do not deny Allah's attributes. The Ash'aris affirm Allah's attributes while negating any resemblance of those attributes to anything in the creation. So if you want to understand what is meant by that, one of the great Imams of the Salaf, who Ibn Taymiyyah himself praised in his compendium of religious judgments, which is like 25, 26 volumes. He has a whole book on that, a volume on at-tasawwuf, Sufism. Mm. And he praised one of the great men of the Salaf who died in the year 298, named Imam Junaid al-Baghdadi, who is one of the men of the Risala of Al-Imam Abu al-Qasim al-Kushairi, rahimahullah, one of the most famous books of Tasawwuf as a foundational text about what Sufism is. In that book, among the first sections of that book is the Aqidah, the I'tiqad of the people of Tasawwuf. It's the first early section in that book. It's all about the creed. He mentions what Imam al-Junaid said. And he said, At-Tawheedu ifradul qadimi min al-muhdath. That at-Tawheed, the oneness of Allah, is to distinguish the one who has no beginning, meaning Allahu Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, from the one who is a created event, which is the creation. That's where it's mentioned. Imam Junaid said that's Tawheed. The Ash'ari, while affirming the attributes as Allah revealed in the Quran and the Sunnah, they negate any resemblance of the creation. Mm-hmm. So, for that, they call that negation denial. So they deny attributes. No, they deny false meanings and interpretations that resemble Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala to his creation from the attributes of Allah. So that false ascription of being Jahmi was a way to undermine at-tanzih, which is divine transcendence. So for instance, to make it more clear, where they said, the verse of Quran, for instance, Ar-Rahmanu ala al-arsh istawa, in Surah 20, verse 5. They took this verb istawa and gave it the meaning of settling or rising above or sitting, which the Ash'ari said these meanings are not befitting to ascribe to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. Either we recite the verse and we leave it with the knowledge of another verse, Laysa kamithlihi shay, no thing resembles Allah. Or we give a befitting meaning of that word that is suitable in the Arabic language that matches what is revealed in the Islamic texts of the Quran and Sunnah. And that first approach is the primary approach when we're not dealing with people of innovation. This is what Allah said. We affirm it while knowing that he doesn't resemble his creation. And we stop. Is that the Ash'aris? No, that's the Aqidah of the Salaf. Who from the Salaf? The great Imam, who was the Imam of Mecca in his time, Sufyan ibn Uyayna, who was the Shaykh of Imam al-Shafi'i, and the Amirul Mu'mineen of Hadith in his time in Mecca. He talked about those types of verses. He said, tafsiruha, kira'atuha, wa sukutu anha, that its interpretation is its recital and remaining silent. That is the Salaf. Didn't we say we follow the Salaf? Why do we have a problem with the creed of the Salaf? So I guess the Salaf were deniers of Allah's attributes too. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. And who related that? Imam al-Bayhaqi related that in his book Al-Asma wa Sifat, the books of names and attributes. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, that great Hafiz, Al-Hafiz Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, he mentioned that in the most famous commentary on Sahih al-Bukhari called Fathul Bari. He mentioned that same narration, and the scholars took the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, La hijra ba'd al-fath, and applied it to his book. I mean, after he wrote his book, there's nothing else to talk about. So these are our scholars. Do we follow these people who ascribe literal meanings to the attributes of Allah, which can entail resembling Allah to his creation, or do we follow the way of the Salaf? Which one? And Allah knows best. Oh, we hit all the issues.
MashaAllah.
Unless there are other questions. The other questions are similar.
I do want to expound upon that, though, if that's okay.
Tafadul.
It's been a while since I've heard the term Jahmiya being used to refer to Ahle Sunnah. Very rarely will I find someone from the other side willing actually to engage in a dialogue. If it's not a smear campaign or a threat of violence, I mean, that's pretty much all you're going to get. But some of them are sincere, and so an easy way to have that conversation respectfully with those who may say you're denying the attributes of Allah is to use a very simple example. For example, Allah is attributed with yad, and some are itching to say, but he has a hand. And I say, well, you're making ta'wil, because these people are deniers of ta'wil. They're saying, what do you mean? Yad means hand. Well, we also refer to the dictionaries of the Salafus Salihin, right? You want to say you want to wave the flag of the Salaf, you have to go all the way. They have famous dictionaries like Al-Ain, Al-Qamus. These are like the Sahih Bukharis of their dictionaries. So when you see a term like yad, which is in Fusha, being translated to hand, despite the fact in these dictionaries there's 20 different definitions for yad, the fair question would be, how did you pick this one definition and nullify the other 19? Because these dictionaries will say, what? Yad means the handle of a sword. It means the wing of a bird. It means negligence. Can someone say, you know what? I accept the attribute of yad, and from this dictionary, I want to say Allah has a wing like a bird. And also it can mean power or protection. When the yad of Allah is over the jama'ah, the protection of Allah is over the jama'ah. So you have to find a meaning that is befitting when you're translating it. By virtue of translating it, you are actually engaging in ta'weed. But if you want to play it safe and leave it as is, you don't want to do that hard work like our great scholars of Aqidah did, you can leave it as yad. But the moment you translate it to any language, you're by virtue engaging in ta'weed. So you have to see which word is a valid or an acceptable attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's not denial of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
MashaAllah. Okay, so we're reaching the end. And some questions, and I'm going to say this, so because I know our crowd, right? For me, since I'm responsible for this stuff, I want us to learn step by step. I don't agree with microwave Islam, right? I don't at all. So the issues are deep, and we cannot take every single issue. So we start with the most important issues. The most important issue is the creed. That's the most important issue. So if some of us, we have a problem with a certain group or a certain organization, that's your personal prerogative. But the creed of Ahle Sunnah is what we're talking about. And the creed of Ahle Sunnah preceded the group you're talking about. So we don't even need to talk about the group. The creed of Ahle Sunnah still exists. Let's talk about that. For the issue. Now, if you want to talk about the specific group, that's another issue. Don't talk about the group to try to negate by way of the group the creed of Ahle Sunnah wal Jama'ah. The creed of Ahle Sunnah wal Jama'ah is established from today to the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The group may existed whenever the group existed, like many groups existed from all different times. So that's not the bar by which we're going to weigh a creed. Right? You don't have to talk about my sheikh at all. You don't have to talk about his sheikh. You don't have to talk about so-and-so sheikh. Talk about the creed of Ahle Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Let's wipe him out. Take him out the equation. He don't count. Fine. Can we still talk about the creed without that sheikh? Can we still talk about the creed without that group? If the answer is yes, then you haven't avoided the issue. And the answer is a definitive yes. Right?
Right.
So I don't want to get lost in personalities.
There you are.
Right? I'm not running away from it, but don't use it as to detract from the reality of what we're talking about.
Exactly.
Right? Don't use it for that. Right? I'm not going to say reverse. I want to defeat a Wahhabi creed, so I have to talk about Bin Baz. I don't have to mention Bin Baz at all. Bin Baz wasn't the first Wahhabi. There were Wahhabis before him. Right? So we don't have to, it don't got to be personal about Bin Baz. It don't have to be personal about Ibn Uthaymeen. It doesn't have to be personal about Al-Albani. It don't even have to be personal about Ibn Taymiyyah. The issue is the issue. Since we're all claiming to go back to the Salaf, listen, there's no going back to the Salaf except with a chain of narration. That's a science in our religion. Let's get out the chains and let's examine them. And let's study the biographies and the lives of Rijal al-Sanad, the men and women who narrated these texts. And let's see what we find. Simple. Or are we too lazy to do the work? Right? It's simple. Bring your chains of narration. And I'm not saying all of us are able to study. I may not be able to do it, but you can. So bring it. And wherever I'm falling short, you fill in the gap. We brothers, ain't we? If I'm saying something that's wrong, then I should be corrected, no problem. Bring your chains of narration and give me one chain, one, just one. I didn't ask for 10, one. That all of the people of that chain were Salafi and Wahhabi, and it is in their biographies, and they weren't Ash'ari or Maturidi or Sufi. Show me. That's not that hard. You have chains of narration. Bring it.
There you are.
That's not a fight. We want truth. Show me. You do agree that the chain of narration is a part of the religion. When we want to verify information, show me your Senate. Sammu lana rijalakum. Name your men. This is what you're telling us. Bring it. You Ahl Hadith, that should be easy. Don't skip generations. That's a broken chain. It's not valid. It's da'if. Remember, y'all don't accept da'if. Don't bring me a broken chain. Bring me a connected chain. And when you get that connected chain, because you have them, you have them, and we do too. So the idea that they don't have chains, they do. They stole them from us. They have them. Trust me, they have them. Bring them. Let's read them. Let's look at them. Let's examine the men of the chain. And as we examine the men of the chain and the women of the chain, we're going to see a pattern. When we see that pattern, we're going to be confronted with truth. There is no chain except that it went through the Ash'aris and the Maturidis and the Sufis. There is no chain and no science. So now you're going to tell me that our religion came from a bunch of grave worshipers and saint worshipers and deviants? Then we don't have a religion. And everything you claim to make something sahih is batil, according to your own claim. Oh, we're going to skip all the great scholars and we're going to go back to the Salaf. The Salaf didn't do that. Why are we doing it?
There you are.
We need a history lesson. This is facts. It's not a fight. You making it a fight so we don't have a real discussion.
That's the work
because
of it.
These are easy things. And then you can have legitimate, it ain't about ego. Listen, we already know we don't know. Since you do, show us.
There you are.
We don't know, we agree. But we not lacking total in intelligence. We do have some critical thinking skills. We do read. We can see and examine, right?
Right.
It's not hard. I mean, it's hard when somebody's blocking you from information and they won't show you. Yeah, it's very difficult. But we don't need you to bring the books. You just bring yourself. We got the books. Right? And here, that is our religion. It ain't about me. It ain't about you. Man, we have generations to protect. Did you hear what our brother described in his country? We can't let that happen to us. And they can't let it happen to them. We got to fix this problem. Or someone's going to be 50 years and now talking the same talk because we didn't do our job. And guess what? Look at the result. It's not pretty. It's not pretty.
If I could add to that,
Yes, go.
Iblis, as my closing comment, Iblis, la'natullah alayh, he doesn't want a group like Ahle Sunnah to thrive. And if you look in the seerah, yani not just scrolling through miscellaneous YouTube videos while you're multitasking in your house, actually study it. You will see that the Prophet ﷺ, why did they want to kill him? Why did they slander him? Why did they come up with all these schemes? Not because he wanted to feed orphans, not because he told people to pray. It's because he was teaching the people the creed. He was clarifying and rectifying the creed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as did his forefather Ibrahim alayhi salam, wa Musa, wa Isa, and etc. So if you want to be a pawn of Iblis, well then he'll help you with that. But if you want to work with Ahle Sunnah to preserve the creed, I don't care what group you're from. I don't like some of my family members and they don't like me, but guess what? Don't we cooperate for the sake of family? Ahle Sunnah is my family. That's more important than any bloodline. So if someone's Ahle Sunnah, I don't care if you're rude. I'm going to teach you manners. And if I'm slow, you're going to teach me how to be smart. Khalas, we're going to benefit from each other. We're one family at the end of the day, whether you like it or not. We always have that awkward uncle at the Eid dinner, but hey, we don't cut them out of the Eid invitations, right? So to engage again in this cancel culture, let's cut this group, that group. Guess what? My sheikh, the people in the organization, they make mistakes. By virtue of our aqidah being what? Prophets are immune from sin, right? So if you're not a prophet, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to make sins. And likewise, the mashayikh, the talibul ilm of any Islamic organization are going to make mistakes. So if someone makes a mistake, they get cut out. By virtue, you have to cut yourself out too. We have to wait for Isa to come back and to fix everything. This is the work of Iblis. So may Allah protect us from that.
And here, I wanted to show you something. Just history. It's like history is very important. You know, before the University of Medina, when it was established, do you know that most of the prominent teachers they brought from outside the kingdom? They brought them from outside the kingdom. They had them teach in all the sciences, and they watched them so they could preserve their aqidah. When they got their families and their children to learn, they kicked all those people out and they replaced them with them. That's a historical fact in their own books. It was good enough for you to build your institutions. How all of a sudden now that you've established, it's all confusing. It was good enough for you to build your institution. It was good enough for you to train. This is real stuff. This is history.
Right.
And for us, we've seen this movie before. We've seen a people come in, dominate a land, subjugate a people, erase their memory, and change history. We've seen that. Like, there was native people in this country that they got wiped out. And then the narrative, we come from Africa. They brought us here and wiped our lineage. And some of us still don't know who we are. We've seen this movie. Right? It's not a new movie. It's different characters, but the movie's the same script. When are we going to learn? And that's not a fight. That's really not even a debate. That's a discussion.
Right.
But they make it a debate, so we never have a discussion. It's easy to debate. Then you can say, I don't want to argue. Let's not argue. Let's talk. No, we don't got to argue. There's, like you said, we got the uncle at the barbecue. I'm not arguing with him. That's Uncle Ray Ray. That's what he do, right? We're going to still function. I think that part we need to do. And if we don't have the discussion, it will never be had, because the one who already dominated the media, the area is going to make the narrative if everybody else remains silent, right? If somebody didn't say there's no such thing as Santa Claus, I mean, we live in the projects. We don't have a chimney. We don't have a chimney. You live in the projects. That's your mother bringing those gifts, who took all her food stamps to put together to get you something. This is reality. They would tell us it's Santa Claus who came with Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. No, there's no such thing. Somebody had to tell us that. But if they didn't, we would be grown still believing that. Somebody has to tell the truth. Somebody has to tell the truth. And we can't get mad at the person who says, there's no Santa Claus. There's no Santa Claus. I'm sorry. Islam didn't start with Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. It didn't. Muslims wasn't worshiping graves before he came. All the Muslims were not oblivious of La ilaha illallah till he discovered his da'wah. That's not true. I know that's the narrative, but it's not true. So they actually said that. One of their sheikhs in Medina, he says recently, they asked him about the people of Palestine. What advice? He said they need to return to Tawheed. Huh? That's your advice? All of the people of Gaza, they're mushrikun and they need to return to Tawheed?
Including the babies, apparently.
Give me a break. But that's their advice. They need to return to Tawheed and see what Allah did for us because we are the people of Tawheed. He protects us. And Allah would support this religion even by a fajr. No, kafir, which is you mean, not just fajr, kafir. That's who protecting you. Just be real. But the Muslims are getting slaughtered because they mushrikun. They don't have Tawheed. Come on, man. Stop. And when you look at the great scholars from generation to generation, that's really insulting. But because we don't know nothing about scholars, we don't know nothing about our chains of, like, these are great ulama, masters of the Islamic sciences for generation, but all of them were mushrikun. They didn't know Tawheed. It's not even funny what we're fed. It's not funny. It's really sad. And then we went through all, and we got to stop, but let me stop there. I mean, it's really like sad because you'll go on and you go too far, but it's just sad. And if we don't teach, our people will never know. If you don't say anything, they're not going to know. And no one's going to tell them. And guess what will happen of that after a few generations? It will be as if it never existed. Our whole tradition will be wiped out. Is that fair to do to your children? Your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren? Is that fair? No. That's the height of dhulm, injustice, to do something like that. So may Allah make it easy for us. Any closing things, and you can close us out. We always give the guests the honor of closing everything out.
And just ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us the ability to be humble, to work with one another, to cooperate with one another, to overlook what repels us from one another, and to grant us in Jannatul Firdaus with one another. The work of da'wah is not easy, but nothing good comes easy, as you guys know. So may Allah facilitate the path of guidance for us until we die. Allahumma ameen.
صلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. بارك الله بكم وجزاكم الله خيرا والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Hold on, Sayyidi.